You know, delivering excellence is more than just 18 wheels moving products around the country. Trucking is complex, and its people are passionate. Accommodating a diverse driving workforce, ever-changing regulations, supply chain demands, and new technologies all present their own challenges, but in trucking, the creative and the innovative succeed. Let's understand the people that drive and support the trucking industry, and welcome to Garner Trucking's Beyond the Cab. Hello and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Cab. I am your host, Tim Krolsky, and with me today I have a vast room of knowledge, a lot of brain power in the room today. I think our first podcast with more than two other people, so kind of cool today. I have with me today Eric Sponseller, who is currently our brand new retention specialist. Former driver and some experience there, and we'll tell you why here in a minute. I also have Ben Helly here with me, current driver for us, over-the-road driver, and has many miles of experience and has cut his teeth well here at Garner Trucking. And then finally, I have Jenny Fall, who is our enrichment and engagement manager. And we're going to talk today a little bit about the One Percenters Club. We're going to talk a lot of it about the performance bonus incentives and just kind of give a little bit of background on these things, where they came from, why they're here now, and what we're doing that's kind of positive, that's affecting or getting gains as far as that performance bonus is concerned. So, starting at the top of this, I'm going to ask each one of you, Ben and Eric. As far as the One Percenters Club, that is the group of individuals that have figured out a way to do less than 1% or less than 1% in idle time, and we've seen some of that. It's a pretty, you would think, pretty simple thing, but it can be complicated. So, Eric, I'm going to start with you. So, what's your technique? What are the things you're doing to reduce that idle time so that you're at 1% or below?
Well, the one thing I do, first of all, is when I make a delivery, as soon as I come to my driver check-in, I set my brakes and I immediately shut the truck off. I shut the engine down immediately. I don't let it run. I don't let it run going in to do my check-in before I go in to do my load or to back into the dock. I restart the vehicle after I've delivered my paperwork, and in most cases, open the doors right there while the truck is stopped.
Okay.
So the only time then, at that point then, I start the truck, get backed up in the dock, shut down again as soon as I'm docked. And I don't let the truck idle for any length of time. If the truck's stopped, I'm most likely shutting down at that point.
Okay.
Not letting it run. And also, too, like when you're stopped for a train, if I'm not moving, and who knows how long that train is,
you shut it off.
I'm shutting it off. I'm setting the brakes and shutting the engine down.
All right.
Because it could be a 20-minute wait.
Ben, you handle things any differently than that, or any other magic?
No, about the exact same thing. It's my philosophy is if I'm out of the cab for more than a minute or two, shut the truck off. The only time that truck stays on when I'm not in the cab is if I'm actively dropping and hooking onto another trailer. But as soon as I've done that, doing the pre-trip, as soon as I get to the pre-trip, when I back into that empty, and then I shut the truck off because I know I'm going to be out of it for more than a couple of minutes. Same thing as Eric, stop at a railroad, turn the truck off.
No kidding.
Yep.
I would not have expected that today. Yeah. I would not have expected that was a thing.
Shut it off when you're doing that, because same thing, a lot of them are a minute, 90 seconds or less, but you never know when you're going to have the second, especially on 6, you've got double track, so you may have a train coming north and then a train coming south right after it. Yeah. So you've got a couple of them you're waiting on. Another thing that I've done is once, if I come in, and it's not something I deal with very often just because of the times I drive, but if I come into where there's an accident and there's traffic backed up, our trucks now, after they sit idle for so long, the shutdown comes up on the screen. If I'm sitting in standstill traffic and that comes up, I shut the truck off until I see the traffic start moving again.
Right. Okay.
So I'll sit in standstill traffic with the truck off.
Huh. Yep. Yeah, I would not have expected that today.
That is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great little philosophy. I guess on the flip side of all of this, and knowing that you guys are at kind of the top of this this particular club, what do you think? What do you think the reasons are that drivers aren't attempting to do these sorts of things?
They don't pay for the fuel.
That's fair.
Well, they don't have consideration for that reason. They're not thinking about, I shouldn't be idling this truck. We're asked to not idle for any length of time, but some people just possibly just either forget or don't think it's necessary to shut the truck down. They just think idling is perfectly fine. So
you haven't been in a situation though where with regard to the APU, where your climate and your level of comfort, it's there, correct? I mean,
it is. That's the other thing too. When you shut down and you have bad weather conditions, it's very cold outside. It's very hot outside. I immediately get out of my seat and just fire up the APU.
Okay.
Rather than idling.
You do the same, Ben?
Exact same thing. You're loading. I've sat with an accident where I'm sitting for 45 minutes, and I mean,
you just fire up the APU.
The controls are 4 feet away from me. Get out, turn that on, and just let that run. I've had a couple of times where we've had some issues with the APU, where we've had to turn, we've had to turn the idle function on the truck, and that's aggravating because to have that running all night long while you're trying to sleep. But
it's a bit much.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, it's a waste. But yeah, I mean, we have the ability to keep the cab comfortable while we're being loaded, unloaded.
Okay. So all right. I think it really feeds into this idle time, feeds into the performance bonus program that we have here at Garner, and there's a lot of background and time and effort. There was a whole committee that kind of went into putting this thing together. But Jenny, if I could just have you kind of talk briefly about what's the gist of the program and.
Sure. Well, what about a year ago, we decided that we wanted to come up with some sort of program that recognized drivers who are really making an impact for the company and be able to give some of those dollars back, as opposed to a blanket 1 cent across the fleet. So that's kind of the origin and the reason for finding this program. Some of the different things we were trying to track: what technology do we have? What's going to be the same for everyone? With no personal opinions, no what ifs, no manual entry. What technology did we have that was able to track everybody equally across the board? So we came up with the MPG program, which we use our OmniTracks data, which tracks by driver their MPG, their cruise usage, their idle time. There's a couple other pieces of information that the OmniTracks tracks. So we use that data to look at MPG. Then we use our smart drive cameras that pull triggers for safety events that happen over the course of a month. Safety reviews those to see if they're like legitimate triggers. I would say the majority of the fleet don't have any, so that's another opportunity. And the final thing is fueling. If you can save the company money by purchasing your fuel cheaper or at the shop, 70% of the time you get back another cent per mile.
Well, and the last piece especially was one of those things that I think all good intentions right out of the gate, we kind of had that one. We had to rethink it. Absolutely. Thanks to our drivers that kind of pointed it out and said, hey, look, I'm out on the road, and that price you're paying at the shop is much more than what we're seeing here out on the road. And I would say this past year, more than any other time in my history here that I can recall, that it's there were months where it's like, okay, it's just cheaper out on the road than this year.
Significantly cheaper in some cases.
Yeah. So I think the most interesting thing to me about the performance bonus program is watching what's happened in terms of the drivers' behavior, their logic, the questions that they're asking. If they're not achieving, why am I not achieving? What do you find is the big one with that?
The MPG question is always the question I get a lot of feedback on. The fueling was one at the very beginning, but we made those adjustments and counted time over the road for fueling. But MPG, what do? I'm doing everything that I possibly can. I hear a lot about weight. I yes, Ben is one that always says I'm heavy all the time. There's nothing else I can do. I will tell you that I had 3 3 or 4 drivers that said that, and then we looked at some of the other things that we can track, and those drivers weren't doing everything that they could.
Right.
So the cruise was less than what it could be, and the idle time was more than it could be. So just kind of gut checking, like you said, those different behaviors, because we can track that. It's just data that we have from our electronic logging devices, the OmniTrack system, and it's just data. It's not from anywhere other than from the truck when the driver's in it.
Well, and as you kind of pointed out at the beginning of all this, we wanted everything to be tangible, nothing to be guesswork, nothing to be, I suppose, those types of lines of thought. And the one thing that we came up very quickly was, okay, we just have to measure the fleet against the fleet. So when it comes to MPG, our trucks are relatively close to the same. All the models, the styles, they're set up the same way. They have the same general equipment. There isn't a lot of variation or enough variation that's going to be really damaging to that performance. But Ben, you had pointed out a couple of months back the whole weight thing. And we're actually working through that right now. But share with us your logic as far as the weight.
So I am OCD on anything that has to do with efficiency, and so I track my mile, and now, our trucks show what our MPG is. Now, granted, that's an algorithm. It's not exactly what we're actually getting, but it still gives me an idea of this is what you're doing. I reset that daily. So, because I'm tracking it all the time. So, one of the biggest things, if that drops off significantly, there's something wrong with the truck. I need to get it checked out.
Great logic to have, by the way, because we found that through this program, one of the big things is that there were some issues with a series of trucks. We had about 10 of them that were set up differently than the rest, and they were inhibiting the MPG that they needed to get, and we were able to correct it.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And also I understand is that fuel is the second biggest expense that we have. And so that's one of the things is like, how can I reduce that cost as much as possible? So I'm always tracking that different things. And so over the time and over the years of driving, I have noticed there are really 3 factors that significantly affect what is going on with your fuel economy. And I call it the triple W effect.
Okay.
And it's weight, wind, and wet. And so weight is by far the biggest thing that I've noticed that affects my fuel economy. I'm running cabinets out to St. Louis, and you're pulling a 12,000, 15,000 pound load. Your fuel economy is way
totally different. Yeah.
Versus hauling, a 42,000 pound Home Depot load out to New York and bringing a 42,000 pound trash load back here.
Yeah.
There's a significant difference in the amount of what your fuel economy is based off of that weight. Wind is a huge factor. As I'm heading out to New York, most of the time we've got a tailwind, and if it's one of those days where it's 15, 20 mile an hour and I'm heading out, you can just watch the MPG go up as you're heading out, and then you turn around and you're driving back into that, you can watch it drop. And so that's a huge factor when you run into that. And then the last one is wet pavement. If the pavement is wet, it is going to reduce your fuel economy.
Right. Traction, slip.
Traction. So those are the 3 biggest things that I've noticed, and I've tested it. Or I'll change the way I drive. I change different things. Change the way do I let the truck accelerate itself up to speed? Do I do it? Do I put it to the floor? Do I just gradually go into it? Those things affect it a little bit, but not near as much as what those 3 factors.
So it's like, Eric, what are your thoughts when it comes to specifically MPG, since we're talking about that category?
Right, and I agree with what Ben said. Definitely wind is a big factor. And you get a tailwind, you get much better gas mileage.
Or fuel.
I'm sorry, fuel mileage.
I always get
as
that.
in diesel fuel. Yes, that's correct. The big thing and I do watch the real-time read on the miles per gallon, and I've found it in some cases that if you play around with your speed, you can get a different miles per gallon at a different speed depending on what wind conditions are and the weight conditions. So definitely with the tailwind, with the wind at your back, you're going to have much better fuel mileage. But then if you add in the weight, then you have a compounding problem with both wind and weight, especially when you're in a headwind. But the biggest factor I found with fuel mileage or miles per gallon is using the cruise control. I use the cruise control almost all the time. I'm using the cruise control when I'm getting on the expressway. I'm not hammering it to the metal, trying to get up a hill. I'm letting the technology of the truck drive me, and it senses when you need fuel and when you need to accelerate, and so I'm in cruise as soon as I get on an entrance ramp to a highway, and I remain in cruise. And I watch my speed too. So I'm not doing 65. I'm doing 62, 60, and I'm staying consistent. So the idea of using cruise and maintaining a consistent speed contributes, I believe, to the miles per gallon.
Well, I think that was one of the unique things about your performance too, because really you should be at a disadvantage as a general statement. Ben, you have time. You're out on the road. You're long hauling it. You're putting down miles. You have the ability to be able to be consistent. But Eric, we're in a local situation, and so the stop and go for you is significantly more. Yet the reporting that gets done consistently for months and months and months puts you at the top of that MPG. And we look at those things obviously every week and every month. So I just thought it was an interesting thing, and that's what we wanted to know right away was what are you doing that's so, because by rights you should be, your MPG should be down in the low 7s or something like that, and here you are in the high 9s. Yeah. And it has to do with that road speed, that behavior, which, time is money too. And I'm not stating that our drivers should go ahead and slow it way down, but it does have impact.
Well, I have driven at 65, but only when I feel I can, or I feel it's necessary based on the flow of traffic. But if I've got the time to do the 62 or 60, I'm gonna take the time to do that.
Take it a little easier.
Yes.
Do you guys, either of you? So from the truck operation standpoint, Ben, you had mentioned smooth acceleration versus using the cruise control versus mashing it to the floor. What is the best technique there that you found?
Using the cruise, letting the truck accelerate. I mean,
just letting it do it for you.
We're in a giant computer.
Yeah.
Letting the computer accelerate the truck for you.
Yeah.
Because it does have it. I mean, it is a more gradual. You will notice it is a more gradual. And if you're trying to do that gradual acceleration on your own, I mean, let's face it, our roads are not the best. Any little bump you hit, anything, your foot bounces.
Yeah, it's going to show
on the accelerator. So there's times when you're accelerating a little faster, or a little less, and it's not of a smooth. So once you hit about 20 miles an hour, you can hit the resume and just let it go.
Let it coast.
If you don't mind me saying, when I'm local, and I'm in a 45 mile an hour zone, and it's quite a stretch, and I'm at a stoplight, I'm not slamming the gas pedal to the floor when it goes green. It's a gradual increase in speed, and put in the gas, pushing down the gas pedal. But as soon as I see my reading that I had set for my cruise control light up in the bottom of the dash, I hit the cruise control
the button,
and I can activate cruise at that point.
Yeah,
and that I take that as far as I can go until I come to the next stoplight.
So what about the behaviors with Smart Drive? And obviously, there's a couple of things I guess I want to say about Smart Drive first, just in terms of the total way that we handle things on the back end of all this. So our drivers, they're going to have triggers here and there for many different things. And the one thing that I definitely know here in the last couple of months I've found to be true is we get into a situation where a car is getting on the highway, a car is coming over from another lane into your lane, and immediately it'll fire that's not a violation, but it assigns points to that.
It's close following distance.
Trigger.
That's the most often trigger. Is close.
Out of everything that we see on Smart Drive, and I totally agree with that. That's exactly right. So from that perspective, we know, okay, we're going to take a look at this video because there are instances where a driver is following too closely. But what we found for the majority of them, and typically the lower points, is that, okay, this is not a situation that the driver is going to fix or do anything about. That's, that car or that truck is pulling away from you, just not at the tempo in which the camera system's set. So we can't by rights charge our driver for that. But the whole goal is the higher the points, the worse the driving behaviors are. The lower the points down to 0, the better those behaviors are. So the close following distance is the big one. And we eliminate those so that our drivers aren't dinged for them. But what are some of the behaviors that you guys are using out there to avoid? I mean, you over the last year, you've had to have at least 1 or 2 conversations with our safety department over this behavior that happened. So what are the things that you've done over the last year to really try and avoid those things from happening?
My most common is the close following. And same thing. Majority of them that pop up are because the other drivers on the road have no idea what they're doing.
Right.
Nobody can merge on an on-ramp anymore. Nobody knows how to switch lanes. People don't understand. I know how many times you're coming up to an exit, somebody is behind you in the lane beside you, and instead of just slowing down, getting in behind you to get off on their exit, they want to floor it by you and then cut between you and the vehicle in front of you as they're braking to get onto the on-ramp.
Sure.
It's the most common
Oh,
thing.
that's not the way you do that?
Huh? I mean, if you've got a death wish, it is. But, I mean, you run into that all the time.
Yeah.
But one of the things I found in it, and it's actually really nice, the technology that we've got on the trucks is that, especially with our newer lines, our trucks tell us our distance. The radar in the truck tells you how far you are away from the vehicle in front of you, and so you can watch that distance drop, and so you can get a feel for, okay, is this car up? Are they driving 60? Are they driving 64? And so you can get a feel for, all right, this is about how long I have until I'm going to catch up to them.
Okay.
Because the smart drive I found is like once you get to within about a second and a half, and you spend a certain period of time, that's when it's going to trigger it. And so and that's about 82 to 85 feet. It's when that happens. And so I watch that as I'm coming up, and then when I'm getting closer, I know, okay, based on how quickly I'm gaining on them, I'm starting to look for an opening to get over,
right,
to get around them. And so that's just the thing that I've had to work on. Over the last year, it's gotten a heck of a lot better. I mean, I was getting those triggers constantly. And so I was always like, what am I doing? And that's when I started to figure out, okay, here, if you look at the events on the app and on the webpage, it will tell you close following, and then it gives you the seconds of where you're at when you trigger it. And I'm like, okay, so let's do the math here. What's my distance at 65 miles an hour that's going to trigger that based on that time frame? And
so you can see those videos.
I've got it right here. I mean, you can go in and view when you log in, you can view your performance, and it will pull up where it happened, what time. It gives the video, so you can review the vids. I'm assuming it's the same video.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. Yeah.
So you can review it, because there's been a few of them that have popped up, and I've called, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, this was not my fault, and I've been able to get a couple of them removed off of there.
Yeah.
But they do a pretty good job since we've implemented this, of things that were triggering all the time. I mean, when it first happened, my score was over 120 constantly. I'm like, what?
How am I supposed to fix this?
How can I fix this?
Yeah.
And so that has changed, and now, I mean, I'm pretty much at 0 all the time.
Well, see, that's the whole thing about this as far as the smart drive was. The whole reason that was implemented, it was driver exoneration, company exoneration when we get into bad issues. It wasn't meant to be kind of the driver beatdown situation, but we also know that there's situations and issues, and some people drive more aggressively than others, or you have a bad day or make some bad decisions out there. So you've got a tool now that we can use to say, okay, here's what happened, here's what we think you could have done or changed to do this better. We're not using it to discipline drivers and those types of things. Eric, what's your experience been as far as smart drive? I feel like if you're operating at 55, you're really
I don't know, but I'm more of a comment about driving smart.
Yeah.
And Ben was mentioning about how you can see how fast the person in front of you is going. Well, if you're in cruise and you get, in my case, the most recent truck I had, if you get below a 3.6 second gain on the person in front of you, the technology is so sensitive and so smooth that you will realize after a time that you're not doing the 62 you were set at, you're at 55. And you didn't even realize it because it was so subtle.
That's the predictive cruise
Because it's
control,
trying to
I think.
maintain that 3.6 second gap. So what I do is once I've set my cruise, I'm watching the speed just like Ben does. And if I can see out to a distance past the 3.6 seconds that the person in front of me is doing 57, I'm looking in my mirrors and making sure I've got space to my left where I can get over and maintain my speed rather than being slowed down and having to accelerate and use extra fuel to accelerate. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be slowing down and speeding up all the time. So I'm always positioning myself so I maintain a consistent speed.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's another thing. It's the exact same thing. When that starts to drop, and I've had it happen where you're just kind of in the zone and you're driving and you look down and it's like, how long have I been driving 55 on the interstate? And so I watched, you watch that as well, because same thing, that distance starts to drop, the adaptive cruise will start to back off. And so, especially when you're on the interstate, you got to you got to now manually, you got to get into the accelerator.
Yeah, you got to pay attention to what's going on.
So that you can keep your consistent speed to gain up to them, to be able to then, to overtake them. And so that's another thing that's got to be watched. And yeah, 'cause I don't know how many times I've had that happen. It's like,
How long have I been doing?
how long have I been going
Yeah.
57?
Yeah.
In the middle of the night and I'm on the interstate? What is going on?
I think what's funny about that particular piece of technology too, as it relates to all this, it's again another real efficiency in terms of operation. I know that several years back we had purchased a Nissan, and it was my wife's vehicle. I hadn't driven it yet, and we and another couple were headed up to the north side of Detroit. And so my first trip in this vehicle, great vehicle. I loved the vehicle, but it had that particular feature in it, the adaptive cruise. And you guys know as well as I do, if you're up in Detroit, it's traffic. There's things happening. There's just no way around it. It's a major metropolitan. And so as we get through the bend there on I-75 and we're on the north side of that thing, I'm not paying attention. And all of a sudden I look down and I'm at 50 miles an hour, and I'm like, oh, I like this. I like this because all it's doing is just giving me that breathing room the whole way, and helping to keep you safe and obviously operating hopefully a little more efficiently. But then, yeah, you got to get into it to get around somebody. So, yeah, I appreciate the technology. The last piece that we really do need to talk about when it comes to the performance bonus is the fueling piece. And as I had mentioned earlier, Jenny had taken some comments for maybe about a month and a half.
Yeah, probably the first several months.
Yeah, that hey, we're finding this fuel price is a little cheaper on the road, so we had to adjust our thinking a little bit.
It was
with
definitely a
that.
frustration.
Yeah, and we don't. The intent of this was not
No.
it was to reward. So we put together what we feel is a pretty fair program there. But Jenny, can you talk about a couple of things that drivers can do to kind of help themselves out if they're not able to fuel here at the yard? Because that's the big incentive, right?
In most cases, yes, but if they can get it for $1 cheaper over the road, I feel like
You got to
the
do
point
it,
of the
right?
the point of the program was to kind of save that fuel cost. So the WEX app is the very first thing that a driver can do. I know now in orientations, our maintenance director goes over the app and everything they can do over a half a day's period. So hopefully the newer hires get to know the app a little bit more in depth. I know some other folks might not have as much experience, but from what I understand, and Ben, Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you can put your starting and your end point in and see all of the fuel stops along your route before you even begin your day. So you can kind of decide where you can stop, how far you can go, what makes most sense for your day. And I think that's probably the most effective way that you're going to be able to find that cheaper fuel price.
Yeah, if you're going to do it out on the road.
Yeah, and the nice thing is it's our contract price as well.
Correct.
Because we don't pay what's on the sign, and so having that ability to look, and I don't 100% of my fuel comes from here, just based on the routes that I run, and so I'm never worried about that because I know
Right.
I have more than enough to get it out and back. I'm here every night, so I'm fueling up here every night before I take off to head back out to New York. But yeah, that is a nice thing, because that was always, when I first started, was one of the most confusing things. When I would look and I would see the price, and I'm like, I'm getting good price, and then like, no, that's not what we pay. I'm like, what do you mean that's not what we pay?
That's what it says, right?
That's on the sign. And so yeah, that's with having that ability to use that app to be able to look along your route, and you said you can kind of get an idea of like, well, this is about where I'm going to be taking a half an hour break, fuel up when I'm taking my break to save a little bit of time during that little stretch, where is the cheapest fuel for me if I'm going to have to stop anyway.
Yeah. I think it's an important point too, and that's one of those things we were discussing before the podcast, that the one misnomer here is that price at the marquee on the sign, it's not what we pay. So I appreciate you bringing that up today, because it's important to use that app. That app is a great tool for the trip planning portion of things, and it's going to lead you right to that our price discount, not what you're seeing on the sign. Jenny, one of the other things, we are a part of a benchmarking group,
Yes.
and we had kind of premiered this program right at the beginning, before really even having a month's worth of data. This is the plan, the strategy, and unfortunately, our owner was the one that presented the program, and she was met with a lot of adversity in terms of the flaws in the thinking and that sort of thing. So fast forward to
About 6 months later.
October of that same year. There's always a specific topic at these meetings, and the topic wasn't performance bonus, but they needed someone to speak. So I get in front of this room full of very intelligent IT type people and deep trucking operations, folks. And I give virtually the same presentation. The big difference is I have the data to back it up now. And
it's significant.
you could have heard a pin drop in that room with as quiet as it was and how attentive that group was, because I think we have something that's really working for our drivers, and obviously it's working for us if it's working for our drivers. But Jenny, I wish you'd spend a little bit of time here just kind of explaining what's happened over the course of the last year or so since we've rolled this out.
Absolutely. So we have now almost a year's worth of data. We started tracking in February of last year, and I have the final numbers from the end of December. And in that alone, the amount that we've paid back to drivers is over $87,000 in
Booyah.
up to 4 cents a mile per driver.
Wow.
I know.
That's
Wow.
significant. Yes,
When I totaled it, I was like, okay, that's a number.
Yeah.
I also track just how many folks get the 4 cents, because you can get up to 4 cents. Not
Right.
everybody does. You can get 3, 2, 1, and no cents. And I will tell you, the majority of the drivers fall in the 2 and 3 cents a mile category. Just because that top tier of the MPG, that's the top miles per gallon getters, and you can only have so many because we use an average of our top 20 drivers. I will just a little plug. I checked out the numbers before we came in, and Eric has gotten the top tier every month since we've started the program.
As a
So
local
kudos to you.
driver, it's ridiculous to me. It really is. But that was the one thing that I really tried to point out at that presentation, to kind of come back to that for a second, was the trajectory of what had happened with the whole fleet. It went from, there was a small percentage of people at the top and in the middle, and a pretty decent chunk of individuals that still weren't earning or were earning 1 cent. And by the time you fast forward to 6 months later, it's like the roof had raised. The floor had raised, I should say.
You said that $87,000 paid to the drivers. What did it save in our fuel during that same time frame?
The fuel savings was, not including the payout to the drivers, was over $110,000.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Agreed.
That's insane.
When we
Because of
started
driver
tracking it-
behavior.
Right. It just show. It's just, that's an insane.
Nothing else is different. The tractor's not set up any differently.
We're still running the same freight.
Yeah, we're still running the same freight.
Same amount of
Yeah.
fuel you need to get from place to
Exactly.
place.
Exactly.
That's wild.
Yeah. So it actually allows us to entertain something really cool for this year, which I'll roll out. I'll throw this out into the air and just let it kind of simmer for now. But we've got, I think, a pretty cool program that we're going to be able to do something very special for the drivers, actually for all the employees this year through what we're looking at as a profit sharing program.
Fantastic.
And so, all of this stuff is relative. I think for those that really get it, and I'm surrounded by people in this room today that get it, everything that you can do to save a little bit of money for the organization, it comes back. It comes back. And the proof's in the pudding with this particular performance program and the efforts of our drivers to be attentive and care enough to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, Jenny, what can I do differently? How do I achieve
love those
this?
calls, honestly. I'm like, if you have questions, like Ben's called me multiple times, but I appreciate it. You have ideas. You're the ones doing the work. So if there's something that we can do differently or it doesn't make sense, the weight thing in particular, I know we kind of talked about that earlier, but we are looking at what way we have to eliminate any manual process. Right now, it's not a mandatory thing to include weight on all the loads.
Right.
And we talk about this once a month now. What else could we do? Like, how else could we measure these different weights?
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a conversation.
We wanted to be fair from the start with this, and we want to continue to be fair with it. And as these ideas and things come up, you guys are the ones helping us shape these programs. It doesn't work without the support of the driver and the input of the driver, and I think that goes a long way.
Well, that's one of the things I've told Jenny this multiple times when I said, with these types of programs, I love these types of programs because what it does is it, as drivers, we now have skin in the game. Mm-hmm. If I can make some slight adjustments, if I can, instead of fueling up, on the road to get points on my pilot card and I know I'm going to be here, I can fuel up here. Just little things like that to help to save the company. When you have skin in the game, you're going, if I do this, I'm going to make more money. Mm-hmm. You're going to have a better chance of getting that behavior to change. The profit sharing, that is an absolutely amazing. My wife's company does that. They do a profit sharing program, and it is amazing when you see the numbers and how expenses change and the inputs into the company change when employers are like, if I just make a little bit of an adjustment, I can get an extra check every month.
Here's the impact.
Yeah.
I mean, you just look at the profit we've made on this program alone. This is profit, so you want to share.
Right.
I mean, that's...
Yeah, it does.
This is three simple things we're tracking.
We're in business to make money, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, it takes all of us working together, and I think this is testimony to that for sure. Yeah. Well, I want to take a moment and thank all three of you for joining me today. This was different to manage because I'm looking around the room the whole time. I appreciate the input today, and I think there's a lot of valuable information that you've been able to share with the fleet. Yeah, and I thank you each for your time, and I thank you for listening to another episode of Beyond the Cab.